I wanted to comment on segregation in athletics, whether it's in the student world, in schools, or in the adult world, based on gender identity. And I want to talk about the inclusion of transgender people in, female only or male only teams. See, I think transgender people should be able to choose, whether they want to be on the boys' team or the girls' team, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they should be entitled to the same, locker rooms and changing spaces and restrooms. I don't see how this problem isn't solved by like unisex changing stalls and unisex bathrooms, but basically my view is that there should be a place for sexually segregated athletics, but there should also be a place where people can be free of segregation in athletics based on sex and gender identity completely. It's just you should have the option. It's like if you want to join the all boys team and you're transitioning, I don't care in which direction, go join it. Just people might want not want you to change and dress in their space, as you probably wouldn't be comfortable with them changing and dressing in your space. The problem is that we're all having to change together or having to go to the bathroom in more or less the same room. No one really wants that. I'm a straight man, and I realize I'm probably going to the bathroom mostly with other straight men. But the implication is that I would be unsafe if a woman came in. Okay, let's switch it. Let's say I'm a woman and I'm attracted to men, and most of the women who come in are, women who are attracted to men. And that the implication is that if a lesbian came in or if a man came in, I would automatically be, in danger. It depends on whether there's a security guard around, and like that's not necessarily true. So like I'm a man. A gay guy could walk in at any time. Is he automatically threat to me just because he's gay? No, he's in there because he wants to take a shit or a piss, okay? He's not in there looking for people to rape. Who goes into bathrooms looking for people to rape? People who are shitting themselves and pissing themselves? The only people who go into bathrooms looking for people to rape are people with shit fetishes or piss fetishes. And I'm pretty sure the percentage of those people in the population is probably pretty low. So, I'm not worried about getting raped in a bathroom. I was watching this female YouTuber who's basically could be described as like a TERF, a trans exclusionary radical feminist, and she said that I'm worried about male rapists saying they're female and going into the prison systems and raping women. It's like, yeah, I'm concerned about that too, but people's right to self-protection is routinely taken away in prison. Not saying that's a good thing. I'm just saying that's the fault of the prison system. It's not the fault of people who support trans people. Um, what you're complaining about is forced integration. You see, I hope and think that leftists or people who think they're leftists, I hope and think that they're starting to wake up and see that there's such a thing as forced segregation. And there's also good segregation that's voluntary, like when a locker room full of girls doesn't want someone with a penis to come in, even when they say they're female. I understand that. But that female with a penis, that female identifying person who has a penis, they should have a place that they can change and go to the bathroom without worrying that they're going to be upset or abused. And it would be a place that others know that that person is not going to abuse or upset them with their presence. See, the problem is the unifying theme in all this is we don't respect people's privacy on an individual basis, which is why we're leading to things like in Florida, there's like a law that security guards can inspect students' genitals to like make sure they're going into the right bathrooms or something. Like, I don't see how that wouldn't be a problem. I don't see how that still wouldn't be a problem in a world where like we expect female to male, you know, trans people to always look and present like males and have surgery to have a penis and like, think the other way too. Like anyone who's saying they're a woman must look like a woman. Like I have long hair. I should probably wear a dress wherever I go and pick a female name, right? You know, you got to let people be between genders or be a gender or not talk about their fucking gender and sex all the goddamn time like it's part of their, the only part of their identity. We have to have spaces that recognize that there's a place for sex-based segregation because people want privacy and people are less uncomfortable being around naked people of their own gender or sex than the other or another gender. and there also has to be a space where people have privacy. And so it's that privacy is not being respected. Um, there was this that turf I was talking about on YouTube. She was complaining that um, sex-based protections, like protections for women, are being replaced with protections based on gender identity. And she's criticizing that based on the idea that a person doesn't have the right to identify themselves as the gender that they identify themselves with. And like, I agree with her in saying that not every transgender person is really transgender, and that yeah, that was probably a guy who said he was a woman so he could go to a women's prison facility and rape women. So not all, I can admit that not all people who say they're transgender are really transgender. Some people are crazy, like that dude in Britain or whatever who said he's like 50 years old and he said like I'm a 6-year-old girl. Like yeah, I believe that that guy is crazy and shouldn't be allowed in a women's restroom. But it's like if there's a security guard in the room, what's the problem? The problem is a lack of privacy. The problem is people forget that privacy has anything to do with this. They forget that individual rights have anything to do with this. I have a right to use whatever bathroom I want as long as it's safe and as long as people want me there. So if someone fucking kicks you out, security guard or someone else, fucking get out. There's other places that you can use. It's like, and it's not like women's and men's rooms exclude people right now. I mean, half of the places you can go to, like, they'll be like, oh, the women's room isn't working right now. You have to use the men's room. Or the men's room is being refurbished right now. You have to use the women's room. That happens. Sometimes there's only one bathroom available, and it's frankly irrational, even with all the federal protections and everything, to expect that any business, public or private, any accommodations, to expect them to be even, clean or well staffed, much less, segregated based on three or more criteria. And like, what does every gas station have to have three separate bathrooms? This is not just me criticizing transgender people. This is me criticizing the obsession with sex, the obsession with group based identity dominating the way we think about our identity. Like, if I need to use the bathroom, the only thing that has to do with my gender identity or my sexuality is the reproductive parts that I use that are next to my urological features. Like, it doesn't have as much to do with gender or sex as you want to make it. It's like Sarah Silverman says, height and weight should be the main criteria by which we classify people if we're going to segregate in athletics at all. And that would be the only reason why any protections for women in sports, like having the tees moved up 10 feet and having a separate women's basketball league. That's the only reason why stuff like that is acceptable, because women generally tend to be lighter and shorter. Now, of course, there are women who are heavier and taller than the average man, of course. But think about this, knowing that in a matriarchal society, if you had a bunch of like kick-ass athletic girls or like doing archery all the time and were buff because they had to run around all over the place and they did most of the hunting and stuff. If you had a society where there were like teenage boys like complaining like because the teenage boys are like weak because it's a woman dominated society, if the teenage boys like demanded sexually segregated sports, let alone transgender sports, if the boys demanded, oh, we're not athletic as the girls are, so you need to give us our own. I don't think the women elders would. I think they would laugh their asses off. That's what I think they would do. Not that they have any asses because they're so toned. Um, so you need to read A Vindication of the Natural Rights of Woman by Mary Wollstonecraft. That's the mother of Mary Shelley. And, you know, her husband had some messed up ideas about morality, arguably. And, her daughter and her daughter's husband had some messed up ideas about morality and sexuality too. But Mary Wollstonecraft's idea in The Vindication of the Rights of Woman was that women have been held back in literacy, girls have been held back in literacy, but it's not because they're stupid. It's not because they can't read. It's because fewer females at that point, like 1825 or whatever, fewer females had been given the opportunity to learn to read as compared to boys. So that's why women or lagging behind in reading. It's not because they were inferior. And this is what the crowd who supports forced sex segregation in sports sounds like to me. It sounds like they're trying to be woke while criticizing wokeness itself at the same time. Listen, we have to segregate sports based on sex because, and this is what they really say, because women will always lose out when made to compete with men. They always say it's not men who are going to lose out when women come into men's sports because, the implication is that they're weaker somehow or have less physical prowess. Sounds like to me we have to segregate sports based on sex because women will always lose out when made to compete with men. It's not just me, they really say that. And this is the same as saying that women are inferior and need coddling and need special protections from the government to be as good as men. You know, what I'm about to say might sound a little misogynistic, but it's really just against the idea of privilege. Like a friend put it to me like this: if you imply that there's such a thing as white privilege or that there's male privilege, there might be some privileges that they share that are unique to the type of person they are, but nobody is immune from suffering an accident. No one's immune from getting sick and dying. No one's immune from getting mugged and shot to death. Like bad things can happen to you. So when you say that a certain type of people have privilege, like that leads you to think, oh, they had a privileged life. That therefore nothing bad could have ever really happened to them that could have negatively affected their ability to use that privilege. So they'll always have more advantage and more opportunity than me. And like you don't have any idea how much suffering and abuse and molestation some of these kids in the suburbs go through, okay? A lot of kids are raised rich in the suburbs and their parents don't really love them or care about them and want to protect them, and the kids get addicted to alcohol and get and heroin and have a baby. I know a girl who had a baby and died from a heroin overdose by the time she was 21. A girl in my high school. That was at one of the richest high schools, probably the richest high school in the state of Illinois. Okay? So when you talk about privilege, it's like, yeah, some privileges exist and are characteristic of one group or another, but they don't follow every single person. Some people have hardships in their lives, which makes it impossible or difficult to use those privileges because, like, your privileged family or your privileged upbringing, they'll they'll give it to you, but only conditional, only if you sell out to the man and become a doctor or a lawyer and look like a perfect person and be the perfect, white person in a business suit, who to me is just basically Hitler. They want you to look like Hitler and act like Hitler and control people and love the cops. So it's only the people who are actually lagging behind, not saying they're inferior, it's only the people who are lagging behind who will complain about the lack of special protections or the failings of the type of special protections for their sex or race. And yes, white people have disproportionately been the slavers, the slave owners rather than the slaves. Um, Irish people, yeah, I acknowledge that there was slavery of Irish people, but that goes to show that some people have some white privileges. Well, there's other things about their heritage that really negatively affected them that they were not able to recover from. But time still marches on. We're still trying to get people to recover from those hardships that they or their ancestors suffered in the past. And read read Mary Wollstonecraft. If you don't give girls the opportunity to compete with boys in reading, and now my idea, if you don't give girls the opportunity to compete alongside boys in athletics, give them their own bathrooms and locker rooms. But if they want to be on boys' teams, even if they're not transgender, if a girl wants to play on a boys' team, go ahead. Like if you want to have rules about like no full contact sports like wrestling, don't have, boys and girls wrestling, fine. But like when I was 9, a girl wrestled in the boys' team and like she stayed in it. Like what's wrong with that? And like she's not transgender, she's not just cis girl. I don't see the problem. If people want to be sexually segregated because of privacy issues, sure. If it's voluntary, sure. But that doesn't mean that, all sexual segregation is good, and then we have to have different classes of, all boys who want to play sports must be in boys only, or they must be in integrated. It's like, no, let them choose between being on all boys teams or being on integrated teams. You leave the choice open to them so that they can prioritize either their tolerance or their need for privacy. You let individuals choose their own priorities, and you don't make people dress or change or go to the bathroom around anyone they feel uncomfortable with. You don't make them wrestle anyone they feel uncomfortable with, and you don't make them have sex with anyone they feel uncomfortable with. And this goes to prostitutes. You see, why do I bring this up? Because in ancient Rome, prostitute was a respectable profession, which it should be, but it was regulated. So Roman prostitutes had to take on all comers. They weren't allowed to refuse people. So, like, I understand, like, there's women who are like, I view sex as therapy, and it's sex work, and there's a lot of, old, ugly guys and sick guys and dying guys, but like, they need love too. And it's like, fine, I respect that. But if some people don't want to have sex with an old guy or a sick guy or a dying guy or an ugly guy or a woman or a gay guy or a disabled person or a small person or a dwarf, um, you know, let them choose. If they don't want to have sex with a transgender person, let them choose. You know, I don't like hate turfs, but I also don't hate transgender people. It's like we have a right to voluntary, I'm sorry to say it, but what we call segregation. This turf woman who I'm kind of criticizing a little bit, like she kind of implied there's such a thing as good segregation. She was like, it's not segregation, like the way you think about it. It's just segregation. Like she almost said it like that. Um, because she was talking about the right of teenage girls to not have someone they feel is a man changing with them and looking at them while they're naked. But like I said, it all depends on like, is there a security guard present? Is there someone who can actually make sure that people's rights are, protected? And in a lot of cases, like the insurance, like the insurance policies and the laws, it prevents security guards from actually like helping and protecting people because like a lot of times they're only required. I'm a security guard, by the way. I know this. We're only legally we're only obligated to observe and report. And people think that we're obligated to like protect them. It's like insurance doesn't cover that. The people who are failing you here are not necessarily just the turfs or the people advocating segregation in athletics. If they're supporting forced segregation in athletics, sure, they're the ones failing you. But what I'm trying to say is the prison system and the security system is failing you because the security system doesn't have a real obligation to protect students at school or protect people in bathrooms, and the prison system just deprives people routinely of their ability to defend themselves from other inmates, despite the fact that that's not really a specifically elaborated part of their sentence. And of course, we need to change that. And who's failing you is the people who are taking away your option of choosing. You're taking away your child student's option of choosing between segregated or integrated athletics based on sex or gender. So segregation has its place as long as people consent to it. That's the idea of voluntarism and liberty. And there are things that people would want to segregate on the basis of that make much more sense than gender and sex. Like Sarah Silverman says, height and weight classes. But if people don't want to participate in athletics that classes or segregates people based on height or weight or physical ability, they shouldn't have to either. It should be totally voluntary. Like, I think there's something to be said for getting rid of segregation in classes altogether in athletics, on the basis of physical ability. Because, yeah, a larger person tends to be stronger, but they're also slower on the average, and a smaller person is weaker. Yeah, but they're also more agile on the average. So just remember, some people do have privileges and advantages, but they also have certain disadvantages that might result from those, or, have nothing to do with them. Like you don't know. People have to be able to compete against each other in order for the weaker to become average and get to the point where they could become one of the strongest. you have to give them the chance to play with the best or they'll never become the best. If you don't give them a chance to see what the best looks like, if you don't give them a chance to be beaten by the best in a safe way, not in a way that deprives you of your life or your all your property, but we're supposed to have regulated competition and have controls on monopolies. We don't use those controls anymore. So we have a very unfair market and an unfair society. I acknowledge this, but we need to work to make it fairer. There's parts of it we need to abandon, like the violent state and the monopolistic states and all monopoly. But there's parts of it that we can repair because, like, we have all these courts sitting around. It's like we're not just going to destroy those. We can use those for good. We could use the prison system for good. We could take the violence and the loneliness and also the fear and the lack of ability to defend yourself. We could take those out of the equation by enforcing the right to privacy. Like, if you ban solitary confinement, it's like, what about the people who would rather be alone? You give them a right to go to the bathroom without someone watching them. Give them a right to masturbate without someone watching them, unless that's what they want. But we don't respect the fact that some people might actually need or prefer what to us looks like isolation or loneliness. It's like, I understand banning solitary confinement for people who don't want it, or like as a punishment for bad behavior when it's not a good idea. But if someone's a threat to themselves or others, solitary confinement might be a good idea. It might actually prevent violence. So there are times when segregation and discrimination are done in the interest of promoting people's safety. And as long as it's done to promote people's safety and everyone involved participates voluntarily, and everyone who doesn't want to participate has plenty of alternatives about what they can do instead, then segregation and discrimination can work and it can help people, you know, if you can't get along, then go your separate ways. There are transgender people like Caitlyn Jenner and Buck Angel who are open to some level of sexual segregation in sports or in private accommodations such as restrooms and changing facilities. They understand there are differences between men and women, but there's also differences between men and women and people with lots of different combinations of external, sexual appearances versus gender preferences and sexual preferences. There's all kinds of combinations, but the degree to which this has something to do with pooping and peeing is really being completely over exaggerated. The degree to which your gender identity has to do with athletics is, in my opinion, being over exaggerated. And the extent to which sexual identity has to do with our identity, you know, we need to have individual identity replace group identity. That's the only way to fight cults. And cults breed narcissism, which is a toxic type of individualism. There's toxic individualism, yes, but there is good individualism and there's toxic collective action. There's toxic groupthink, to use a 1984 terminology. And likewise, there's good and bad forms of, and there's voluntary and involuntary forms of so-called segregation, which we should just get used to calling separation when it's voluntary. When it's involuntary, sure, call it segregation. But remember, if we're going to have separation, it does have to be not just separate but equal, but it has to be better than that. When someone feels like they're being excluded and they're not getting like a good enough level of treatment, like we do have to work harder to go out of our way to provide accommodations to people. But remember, there isn't like a third gender exactly. There are intersex people and there's different combinations of chromosomes and sexual appearances on the outside, cosmetic sexuality. But that doesn't mean we have to create bathrooms for all these different types. We need to return to a place where we're thinking about our individuality and the things that make us unique as opposed to what we have in common with other people. Because if we keep basing our lives and our identity based on what groups we're part of, just based on nature or even what we choose, I mean, you can base your identity on what groups you choose is better than basing it on what nature assigns to you. I mean, it's fine to be proud of it. And, I understand you need different types of protection based on what nature afforded you, like disabled people obviously need a lot more protection than people who aren't disabled. But, again, that privilege doesn't carry on to every single person. Any person who's like not disabled can become disabled. In fact, we will all become disabled one day when we're on our deathbed. So, we need to understand we have a lot more in common, but that doesn't mean we have to find bullshit reasons to unite with each other. And it doesn't mean we have to find bullshit reasons to separate from each other. And if someone's going to be separated and it's not exactly voluntary, then at the very least, they deserve equal, material level, accommodations. The locker rooms and bathrooms and other dressing rooms that they're afforded need to be at least substantially of the material quality in terms of like safety and health that are up to par with other people. Separate but equal but voluntary, but with lots of other options. It needs to be much better and have much more alternatives than just separate but equal. Here's an option we haven't even thought of yet. What if everyone in athletics used sexually segregated bathrooms, dressing rooms, locker rooms, and then after that, they went to co-ed sports where all boys and girls and transgenders are all playing together? What about that? Because, like, who doesn't love preferring to change and dress and go to the bathroom in private? I would rather change and dress and go to the bathroom in private alone than with anyone. Women, men, I don't care. I'd rather be alone. I don't know why more people aren't like that. Respect my damn privacy. Who you tolerate being able to dress and go to the bathroom around rather than being alone, that has, in my opinion, it has surprisingly very little to do with who you should play baseball against or who you should wrestle against based on your physical abilities. Doesn't have much to do with how you poop or how you pee or who you're attracted to or whether you think you're a woman or a man or something in between. It's got nothing to fucking do with it. But that doesn't mean we have the right to expect there to be at least, 3 bathrooms, 71 or 72 to make reference to the number of gender categories on Facebook from a few years ago. Like, you know, you're lucky if a gas station has one bathroom open. Just this is the one time I'm going to say, think about how lucky you are. It's like we're still trying. We still have to give people time to catch up, in literacy, in college attendance, in athletic prowess. Maybe if we keep trying, someday the average woman will be as strong as the average man, and they'll be just as literate on the average. We can only hope that happens, but we're not going to achieve that if we keep lowering our standards and segregating people and expecting less of women and expecting less of black people and expecting less of disabled people. Like, sure, we have a place for the Special Olympics. There's like, strong people with like just like a foot missing, and now they have a super fancy metal foot and they're like a cyborg now, and they're in like, should they be in the Special Olympics because it's like they're disabled, but it's also like they're a strong ass badass man who kind of has an advantage because he's part cyborg and shit. So it's like, again, we're just trying to class people based on groups, and it promotes classism. It promotes the division of people and the distraction of our attention from the things we have all in common, which is that we're all exploited by a giant hierarchy that wants our labor and wants us to focus on cults and narcissism and base our lives on what a bunch of other people are doing, like in common with us, like based on like our penis or our butts or who we have sex with. um we should just, that's what should be on our tombstone, like what our penis looked like and who we had sex with. I mean, who we love should probably be on our tombstone. It makes sense, but like, holy shit, does everyone have to know exactly who you had sex with when you die? Is that's part of your fucking accomplishment? Holy goddamn shit. It's like, I'm just trying to go to the bathroom. I'm just trying to change. I'm just trying to participate in sports. I'm just trying to go to school. Don't inspect my genitals. This is what the liberal culture says to transgender people. Like, we'll accept you as long as you fully transition. It's like, once you present like that, once you look enough like the role, it's like, don't you get it? They're still making you choose between being a hypersexualized woman and a hypersexualized man. There are people who feel they have righteous hesitance to treat people like what they say they are based on, the possibility that it doesn't completely line up. Think about it this way. If you encourage someone to continue transgender therapy when you don't know whether maybe they've thought about it, maybe they have second thoughts about it, maybe they're thinking about stopping. So if you're encouraging them and their family encouraging them and their friends are encouraging, it's like that's good until they start to have second thoughts about it. And what if when they have second thoughts about it, they're like halfway through transitioning? Well, there comes to a point of no return where they've taken so many hormones, they've had a surgery, and like some of them do, we found some people do want to go back. So, encouraging people and tolerating people is great. Just they have unseen thoughts that you might not know about, and they might regret it and might not be talking about it because of how much support they're getting now that they're out as a transgender person. So, by encouraging people to confirm their gender, you might accidentally be supporting them conforming to the gender roles that society has enforced, which is that, oh, if you're exhibiting any feminine traits, if you're a man, then it must mean you're transgender. Grow that hair out, wear a dress, pick a female name, like I said. Not everyone will respond to that. Not everyone wants to go in that direction. Not everyone wants to go that far. Don't give people unwanted advice.